Hi, everyone. Good evening. It is Wednesday, April 6th. This is our first night of Discovering Buddhism, Transforming Problems with Venerable Amy Miller. We always like to start a new course by introducing the teacher. And tonight I thought, actually, maybe I'll just talk about myself instead. I met Venerable Amy over 10 years ago, and I've had the privilege of doing classes with her, some short retreats, and even a pilgrimage in Nepal. And I've always been struck by how insightful she is, how clear, and with this great ability to make the teachings so relevant and so accessible. So we think this is such a great combination of teacher and topic. Venerable Amy has been teaching extensively since 1992. She managed Chen Ling in the early 90s. She was the director of Vajrapani Institute for almost 10 years, also the director of Milarepa Center in Vermont. I mentioned she leads retreats, pilgrimage, and she's been a traveling teacher for the FPMT. Right now, she is living and teaching at Land of Medicine Buddha, and we are thrilled to have this class with her. So we'd like to start by offering a mandala on behalf of the center. And that's a way that we create the cause for the teaching to happen. And I will hand things off to our director, Venerable Carol Karate.
Thank you, Gina. Sajipuki Tukshin Meto Ramri Rablingji Ni Degan Padi Sangye Jingdu Mikte Uwaye Tokunam Dak Jingla Chapasho Idam Guru Ratna Mandala Kam Niryatayami.
Thank you, Venerable Carol.
So we're going to do the Refuge and Bodhicitta prayer. And again, please give it some thought of what you're actually saying. These 4 lines actually contain the whole path. So, why do we go for refuge? Looking at the lower scope motivation of a lower capable being is all about being terrified of what may come next, may be unbearable, but using that fear to motivate our practice. Right? And then looking at the suffering of middle scope, a middle capable being wants to get out of their own suffering and reach nirvana or liberation. But the real reason we're doing this, according to the being with the highest capable motivation, is it's not enough to free myself from the suffering when so many others are suffering. So if I can actually become a Buddha, then I have the ability unlimitedly, perfectly to work for all living beings. So it's really that bigger motivation. With that in your heart, especially those of you that have taken refuge, that have a deeper understanding of refuge, which is one of the earlier modules, let's recite this twice in the English and once we'll chant it in the phonetics with as much of that in mind as possible, of just that scanning motivation in your mind of the entire Lamrim, our path, steps on the path, really thinking about the words that we're saying. I go for refuge until I'm enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By the merits I create through listening to the Dharma, may I become a Buddha in order to benefit all sentient beings. I go for refuge until I'm enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By the merits I create through listening to the Dharma, may I become a Buddha in order to benefit all sentient beings. I go for refuge until I'm enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By the merits I create through listening to the Dharma, may I become a Buddha in order to benefit all sentient beings. O Sangye Chodanzo Kichon Nam La Janchu Bardu Dagni Kyap Suchi Dagi Chiningi Peso Namgi Drola Pencher Sangye Druparjo. Just take a moment, please. Thinking about your purpose for being here. If you'd like to close your eyes lightly. Just take a deep breath in, deep breath out. As you slowly let go of the distractions of the day. And bringing yourself more present into the space together. And just reflect for a moment on your purpose for being here. Why you might want to engage in a class like this. So this is a course on lojong. Lo is mind, jong, transformation, training the mind. We train our mind through difficulties, through looking at difficulties differently than the way the rest of the world looks at difficulties. We use those difficulties, those problems, to transform our mind into something glorious. So think you can get information in this class, that through that mind training may help you progress along this path to becoming a Buddha more quickly, to becoming a fully awakened being, which is what Buddha means in Sanskrit. Fully awakened being, free of all fear, omniscient, fully empowered with every positive quality fully manifests, like wisdom, compassion, loving kindness. Every moment you breathe, and all of that focused. So Buddhahood is not the end result. It's not the goal. The goal in our tradition, the goal in the Mahayana tradition is to benefit all living beings, to help all beings perfectly, unlimitedly, happily, blissfully, and peacefully. So if that's something you're interested in, can you feel that in your heart, that motivation? Fold it into your practice. Set that motivation right now for this time together and all the activities of the rest of your day. So please relax. When you're ready, slowly open your eyes. I would like to thank Chen Ling for hosting me again. I'd like to thank Venerable Carol, Gina, Cindy, Peggy, all the people that have made this center possible. And it's a center really close to my heart because some years ago in the very fortunate meeting in 1990 in the Green Hotel in Dharamsala, I stumbled upon Venerable Carol Karate. We were not nuns at that time. On a rainy, dark night, trying to go to teachings with His Holiness the Dalai Lama. And it was a really fortuitous meeting. So, we had an idea to start a center in San Francisco. A lot of other people had ideas, and really out of the great grace and generosity of Venerable Carol, the center started and was established and is now in its, maybe its sixth incarnation. Is that what it is? The sixth place where it's located now on Jules. And so I'm really grateful to Venerable Carol and all the people that have made it possible. There's so many of you here that have kept this center going. So I'm very grateful, and it really wouldn't be there without Venerable Carol and all of you. So very happy to be, it's always a center deep in my heart. And I'm glad to be back in California now near the center again, and happy to do this. So thank you so much, everyone, for showing up. I'd like to make this useful for you, practical for you, for your everyday life. There's really nothing better to talk about than lojong with Tibetan Buddhism. I find it really, really helpful. So let's have a look, and I'll explain what we're going to do in this course, and as well as what this module is particularly about. So let me just go through a little bit of intro right now of what we're going to do. And most of you are familiar with the Discovering Buddhism modules. This is number 11. So it's one of the later courses that very much is involved with Mahayana mind training. So it's obviously for people that have, it's ideal if you have a bit of a background, because you've already gone through some of the modules. You can pick up any of the modules anywhere. So if you're newer to this, to Discovering Buddhism, and you haven't done a lot of the modules, no problem at all. You're welcome. Just be patient if there's some concepts you're not understanding yet. And this goes a little bit deeper level of dealing with some more radical thinking of our mind to help us deal with problems big and small as they arise in our lives. And how do we transform our ability to want to welcome problems, if you can believe that, okay? These modules come along with an accompanying video. I am going to show you the video, which is about 25 minutes long. I really like to have them in one of the classes so you get an overview. The videos are more than 20 years old, but they're still relevant. It comes along with required readings, okay? And the readings for this course, which Gina has made available to you, deal with, there are some writings by His Holiness the Dalai Lama, Lama Zopa Rinpoche, Lama Yeshe. And the thing is, the more you put into these courses, the more you put into this course, the more obviously you will get out of it. It's perfectly fine. Some people want to show up every week and just listen to whatever's being talked about. Some people want to do the readings. Some people do additional readings. There's also meditations, and I will give some homeworks that will include the meditation each week, some exercises for you to think about. So again, the more you want to deal and delve into this, your mind will start shifting over time, and it's all about familiarity, right? So it's the more we put in, the more meditation that we're able to drive a meditation practice on the side with what we're doing, that starts to be a buoyant cushion for our practice. And not only the practice, but sustaining our everyday lives in a more positive way. That's really what we're doing. So one of the beginnings with mind training, I want to mention, we set a motivation in the beginning. It's one of the most important things you can do that we are taught in this tradition, the Mahayana tradition. Mahayana, again, as most of you know, Maha is greater, Yana, vehicle, greater vehicle. So I like universal vehicle. Universal vehicle, you're geared to getting enlightened, but for the benefit of all living beings. I'm not just trying to get out of my own suffering, because I don't like suffering. It's really about reaching nirvana, a permanent cessation of all my mental afflictions, on the way to omniscience, where I've removed subtle obscurations to that Buddha mind, the Buddha consciousness, okay? But that's not the goal. Again, the goal is so I can benefit all living beings, okay? So you can set that motivation before any activity to make it a more virtuous activity. And what it does is it plants deeper seeds of virtue in your mind, okay? And it's those deeper seeds of virtue that carry on in your most subtle consciousness from lifetime to lifetime. Okay? And those are the ones that ripen in your future happiness. So who wouldn't want that? Okay. So there's an additional readings of the wish-fulfilling golden sun. There's some pages of that. It's not reading the whole thing. I mean, you can certainly read it all. It pertains to all the different modules of Discovering Buddhism, but there's certain pages assigned that we will definitely give you. And then, because I think Gina and I had different copies of that, so my pages pertain to a different copy. And there's some additional books, like readings in a book called Liberation in the Palm of Your Hand, many of you are familiar with. One of my favorite deeper Lam Rim books. So there's a section on that that you'd read about mind training, about dealing with problems, about suffering, like that. Very helpful to help change the mind, to shift the mind, like that. And then the meditations. So what we're going to do is we're going to go to the video right now so you get an overview, but I just wanted to give you for those of you newer to Discovering Buddhism, to give you kind of these modules. You do meditations each week. You do some of the readings. I will suggest what readings to do at the end of each session. We'll have a short review at the beginning of each session. I'll lead a meditation in each session generally, probably not tonight, but in future sessions I will, and give you some assignments. What you can do is there are some online quizzes you can take if you'd like through our online teaching module you can find at fpmt.org. I'm happy to direct you to that. There's a final exam, but I wanted to explain how these courses were developed, Discovering Buddhism. Many years ago in Italy, I was part of a core of teachers that developed these courses, and they were really designed as a practical experiential application of the Dharma. So again, the more you delve into it and try to really understand what's happening, to tear apart these 8 verses we're going to dissect, to do the meditations and the readings, okay, you will have probably a little bit more progression on waking up to your practice like that on the path. It's really, really helpful. And Phil, I will make time for questions and answers as well. But these courses, so what I wanted to ask is if anybody, and you can think about this through the course, we often have people that are completing the course for a certificate. When you get a certificate in all the 14 modules, you can then apply to be a teacher for Discovering Buddhism. So for people that are geared that way, if you want to do this course for a certificate, there is a practice component on May 15th from 10 a.m. to 1 p.m., I believe. You would have to participate in that. But then I would meet with you. We can meet on Zoom to do some assessment questions with you. You can also do the online exam if you like, but I'd really like to do some assessment questions. And that way you're feeding back to me as if you're teaching the class. So it goes to a deeper level for you. And it gives you some exercise maybe in how to teach and what information you need to know to see whether you generally are qualified to get the certificate, right? I don't think I've ever flunked anyone from getting it. So do think about that as you're going through the class if you want to complete that, because we'll make some extra time to do something like that after the course. Okay. I just want to ask right now, are there any questions about that from anybody? Okay, everybody's good. I'm going to show you this video on Discovering Buddhism. And I will share my screen. So do let me know if you cannot see it. So can everybody see that right now? Discovering Buddhism, Transforming Problems. Just if somebody wants to unmute.
Yes.
Yep, you're good.
Yes.
Great. Okay. So please enjoy. I'm going to skip a little bit because these are the...
All right, let's just say you've been fired from your job of 5 years, or your husband or wife leaves you. There's been a tragedy in your country, any worst case scenario you can imagine. If someone came along and told you that in reality, this horrible situation is the best opportunity for spiritual practice, you might think they're crazy. But this is what the Buddha taught: how to transform problems into the path of enlightenment. It makes sense. The world is still full of war and poverty, and our minds are full of delusions like anger, jealousy, and attachment. Problems are constant. But we can learn to use these otherwise unfortunate circumstances as an opportunity to accelerate our spiritual growth, using techniques based on loving kindness and compassion for others and ourselves. We can learn to face difficult situations with skill, wisdom, and humor, and literally transform problems into happiness.
Transforming suffering into the path to enlightenment is at the very heart of the Buddha's Mahayana teachings. But these thought transformation techniques are, in fact, very difficult to practice. When they were first taught, they were kept secret for that very reason, because of their difficulty. Thought transformation techniques are based in bodhicitta, and therefore it's essential when one receives these teachings to receive them with a mind imbued by bodhicitta, the attitude wishing to attain enlightenment as quickly as possible, in order to understand thought transformation correctly. Therefore, for that reason, generate in your mind now a strong intention to achieve enlightenment as quickly as possible in order to bring to enlightenment all other suffering mother sentient beings quickly.
So I assume everybody here has problems? Yeah. Often when we have problems, we feel like we're the only people who have problems. But wouldn't you say everybody has problems? But our problems are worse than other people's, right? Isn't it? Definitely, 100% worse. Yeah. So we should be the object of other people's sympathy and their compassion and their aid. And the way to transform our problems is to get them to stop doing all the nasty things they're doing towards us, right? That's not actually transforming our problem. That's throwing the problem at the other person, okay? Telling them that they're the source of our problem, and believing it ourselves, that other people are the source of our problems. Okay. When we have that view on life, you know, that I'm just this little old innocent, sweet, charming, wonderful, joyful person who doesn't mean harm to anybody, and yet all these mean, nasty, cruel, vicious, ununderstanding people cause me problems. We have to totally get out of this idea of blaming. Yeah. Because we're very much, I think, a country and a culture that likes to point the finger and blame. And, you know, you caused it, you did it, you're going to suffer. Okay, if there's a problem, you know, finding somebody to blame means finding somebody that we can cause to suffer, thinking that when somebody else suffers, we're going to feel better afterwards. Okay, I think that whole way of looking at life doesn't work. Okay, because it's not about finding one cause, because everything's interdependent and everybody contributes something. Okay? And it's not about finding the cause so that we can punish somebody. Now, how do we work with problems? How do we transform problems? Okay. I think it depends on how we look at a situation. Okay. First of all, how we define a problem. Because there could be some event going on with somebody else, and you can call it a problem, or you can call it an opportunity. And this is kind of the difference between whether we're looking at things in a worldly way or whether we're looking at them in a spiritual way. Okay? Because in a worldly way, we label a situation a problem when our needs and wants aren't getting met. Isn't that kind of the definition of a problem for you? When your needs and wants aren't getting met, when your expectations aren't getting met, when your plans aren't happening. Okay? So we have an idea of the situation, and what we're looking for is pleasure and happiness and getting our way and being right. Okay, that's kind of what our goal is. Yeah, our goal in a situation is my happiness. When the goal of my happiness, and preferably my happiness now rather than later, okay, when that goal is frustrated, we call that a problem. Okay, so, yeah, and that's our usual worldly way of looking at things, isn't it? Okay. Now, if we're spiritual practitioners, the goal of any situation is not my pleasure. Think about that one for a while. Can you imagine living your life where the goal is not your own pleasure and not your own happiness? Does that seem like something that's possible? Hello out there. If we're trying to practice a spiritual path, our goal in a situation is not my happiness. Our goal is to learn. Okay. Our goal is to learn about ourselves. Our goal is to learn about others. Our goal is to, through this learning, be able to purify our own mind and develop our own good qualities. Our goal is, through this learning, to be able to contribute to the welfare of the world, to, help sentient other living beings along the path to enlightenment, to help them even in some, ordinary way now. So when we change that paradigm, when our goal in a situation is different, okay, then it becomes much more difficult to have problems. So in everything that we experience, everything that we do, there's always something to learn. Approach life with that my purpose in this situation is to learn something that in the end of the day will be useful for myself and for others, then we're never going to have a problem, because in every situation we can learn. When our focus becomes on our own training and our own practice, then our focus stops being to make other people change and make other people different so that they stop causing our problems, because we realize at some level that we can't. Okay, the transformation of the problems starts here with this one. Okay, and it starts with looking at our reactions to the situations that we're in, and really being able to look honestly at our reactions, not paint them over, not be sweet, Okay, but really kind of be able to sit there and, okay, somebody's acting this way. Why am I reacting in this? What do I think I need from this person that they aren't giving me? And how, where does contentment really come from? When you're content, do you get angry? When you're content, do you get jealous? When you're content, do you hold on to a grudge? When you're content, are you full of greed and craving? When you're content, do you hide your mistakes and pretend you don't have them? When you're content, do you pretend to be somebody you're not and impress people falsely? It's like when there's a feeling of contentment in our own mind, then kind of naturally we act with kindness. And a lot of, all those negative emotions and then the behaviors that they cause, they just get pacified automatically because there's no dissatisfied, discontent feeling inside that motivates all of those other attitudes and behaviors. The kind of contentment that we're trying to develop is not the contentment of, I got my way, I got my needs met, the world's love me. It's not that. It's the contentment of us feeling okay about ourselves. It's come simply through our own spiritual practice by using our own mind. When Buddhism talks about contentment, we should not equate contentment with apathy. They're two different things. With apathy, we don't care. Okay. And you can be apathetic and discontent, can't you? Yeah. And I think very often the nihilistic position that people go into in our society, of, well, it's all worthless. It's, or it's just, you just sign it off. This is, it's discontent compounded with apathy. Okay. Whereas contentment is a totally different ballgame. Okay. Contentment is a feeling of well-being in ourselves. So we can have this contentment, some kind of self-confidence. And that will lead us to have compassion for others rather than criticize them and pick them to bits, have compassion for them. And then based on that compassion, act against injustice or prejudice or intercede when there's a harmful situation. Okay? So that compassion can be just as strong of a motivator and a much wiser one than anger. And contentment, we can be content and we can still want to improve things in the future. Okay? There's a sense of well-being in ourselves that doesn't depend on how the world treats us. Okay, there's a sense of well-being in the self that comes through our own spiritual practice. So there's an inner sense of contentment that isn't dependent upon, getting what we want, having people like us and love us and appreciate us and tell us we're right and intelligent and blah, blah, blah. Okay? So, but on the basis of that inner sense of contentment, it doesn't mean that we eschew the rest of the world and block it out and fall into apathy, okay? Because again, motivated by compassion, we can still act to remedy injustice, remedy discrimination, but the way we do it is not going to be in an angry way. We can see, okay, I have a problem and somebody's treating me unfairly or there's discrimination against me or whatever. Have that sense of inner contentment. Yeah. But then actively work to change the situation, not because we hate the other people in it, but because we care about them. Okay. So the person, you care about the person who's oppressing you. You care about the person whose political ideas you think are totally corrupt. Okay? You care about the person who's destroying the environment. You care about the person who's beating up your loved one. Okay? This is very opposite from our usual way of thinking, isn't it? Okay. But, you know, our usual way of thinking hasn't gotten us anywhere, so we might as well try another way. Okay? Because the thing is, if there's this conflict situation, we see the other person as an enemy and we don't care about their well-being, okay, then we're likely to inflict more harm out of anger, okay? So first of all, we're creating negative karma because we have a negative motivation of anger that has the intention to harm. Second of all, we destroy the other person's happiness. You know, because they're more miserable, then they're going to do more that harms us back. So we're just escalating the conflict. So we fight oppression or, you know, injustice or ecological devastation or whatever out of care for the quote, quote, enemy. Because we don't see them as an enemy that's out there that's inherently evil. We see them as another living being just like us who wants to be happy. So this takes, you know, I'm just kind of explaining this using words, yeah. But to actually understand it, we need to sit, okay? This isn't something that we're going to get through just intellectual understanding. We have to really sit, you know, in our meditation practice and think about this. And then we need to examine our own mind. Be able to identify in our own mind when we're content and when we're discontent. Be able to identify in our mind when we're really accepting things and when we've gone into nihilism or apathy. We need to look in our own mind and identify, what does anger feel like? What does genuine compassion feel like? What is a positive aspiration? What does that feel like? So really understanding these things all depends on our own meditation practice. It's not dependent on intellectual understanding, okay?
You know, in order to be able to work with, you know, a problem or a difficult situation, in the sense that it doesn't, you know, upset you or make you angry or like that, is it's not so much that one part of it is having an antidote at the time, you know, or using a technique at the time, right? But I think far more important than that is that one has, you know, a fairly steady, continual, solid practice. You know, meditating on Lam Rim every day, and not just one part of it, but, you know, gradually going through the whole Lam Rim, not choosing like one part that you like and not doing one part that you don't like, but consistently and continually meditating on the Lam Rim, right? So that really is the basis, because if your mind is becoming more calm, more steady on a daily basis by meditating on the Lam Rim, then when situations arise, there's less chance of being overwhelmed by a negative emotion such as anger or attachment or desire. You're much better or well prepared for the situation. And so therefore, in one sense, it's almost more natural because you see the situation, there's a better chance or more chance of seeing the situation for what it is, as opposed to what you're projecting or karmically projecting onto the situation. Somebody who's has been familiarizing themselves with impermanence day after day after day, doing it, properly, effectively, then somebody dies or, there's separation or, in terms of time, if the time changes or a situation changes, it's much more easy to accept. It's much more easy to accept is because your mind is already prepared and more closer to reality, right? If you're making your mind more familiar with this reality that others exist, they have suffering, they don't want suffering, same as yourself, right? It's very sort of straightforward thing. It's reality. Others exist, they're important, they have problems, they suffer, just like oneself, right? So if you're day after day familiarizing yourself with that, and then you come up with a situation, a problem between yourself and some other person or some other people, then your attitude is already, there's less thinking of oneself and more thinking of the other person. So almost already you don't have a problem, because, you'll find in most situations problems arise, or problem exists, or it appears to exist, is mainly because of ego, self-cherishing mind, attachment to one's own happiness. So that's really the basis of creating the problem. And it doesn't mean that outside there isn't a difficult situation, but inside there's not a problem in the sense of like it appearing like a problem, so that you're becoming emotional, you're becoming angry, you're becoming jealous, you're becoming some way upset, your mind is disturbed, right? So therefore, of course, that difficult situation is made very complicated because of the mind being disturbed inside. Whereas, if there is a difficult situation, you have every chance of resolving it if you really are concerned about that other person or what that other person is going through or experiencing. If you really want to help that other person, there's not a problem. The situation still can be difficult, but there's not really a problem. I mean, your mind is not disturbed or unhappy.
So there are a series of these videos. This one was a bit unusual because normally they have a couple of teachers, a couple of students. It's a little bit more divided up, but it's a very pithy topic we're talking about. from what you could hear from Venerable Thupten Chodron, who has founded Sravasti Abbey, the monastic facility in Washington State, and Venerable Roger Kunsang, who is Lama Zopa Rinpoche's main attendant, who's been with Rinpoche for years. So very humble to hear him talk about, you know, somebody who's dealt with a lot of problems from heading up our organization as well, the FPMT. So really helpful when you think about this is look at the way the external world is focused. And you can just see what's happening with Ukraine right now is from somebody's confusion, Vladimir Putin, let's say, okay? When I say confusion, I'm talking about fundamental ignorance, okay? A misknowing of reality, K-N-O-W, when you misknow, you misunderstand reality, which is something we all do until we have a direct perception of emptiness. So we're imputing and projecting, okay, a lot of false notions on our external reality and on ourselves due to this fundamental ignorance. It blinds us in a sense, okay? Why is it there in our minds? Simply because there's a moment of it in our consciousness preceding that. There's a habit of it in our minds, okay? We haven't seen the nature of reality directly. As a result, we mistake things. We get stories going about people. We believe in the stories, okay? The stories have we have a certain perception from our side, certain perspective, but it's not the entire story. It's not the whole truth. And it's interesting when you do project a story onto someone, just because they looked at you a funny way, they look across the room, you start imputing a whole story based on your own limitations, your own low or high self-esteem, whatever's happening for you. And then it's interesting, you get a whole drama going. Person doesn't like you, they didn't look over at you, they didn't wave, they didn't say hi, but you have no consideration of what's going on for them. Somebody else has a different interpretation of what that person, by them not looking over and not waving, has, okay? So we have to kind of bring this into our reality in everyday life. This is how lojong really helps. Let's talk a little bit about where did these teachings come from? Lojong, mind training teachings. Where did they come from? These particular, what we're going to be looking at are the 8 verses. One of the most famous lojong texts, the 8 verses of mind training. Geshe Langri Tangpa. Geshe Langri Tangpa lived from 1054 to 1123. The 8 verses of mind training. We're going to go through each verse. Okay, there's other lojong texts that I really like. The 7 verses of mind transformation. Beautiful lojong text. Again, the 7 verses of mind transformation from Geshe Chikawa. And the beautiful story is Geshe Chikawa, who came later after Geshe Langri Tangpa, okay, happened to come across one verse from the 8 verses. The famous verse number 5, offer the victory to others. We're going to talk more about that verse in future sessions. Offer the victory to others. Okay, so Geshe Chikawa happened to come across like a scrap of paper that had that on it. And somehow from past karma, it completely moved his mind, kind of blew him out, right? And he realized he had to find the author of the verse. It was so significant for him. There wasn't any commentary about it, anything. So he spent time searching, like a huge travel over to Geshe Langri Tangpa, I think was closer to Lhasa, maybe Geshe Chikawa coming from maybe Eastern Tibet. I can't quite remember the specifics of the geography, but spending, I think, weeks, months trying to get finally to find this person, comes to the monastery asking different monasteries, does anybody know the source of this? Who wrote this, the author? And he finds a disciple of Geshe Langri Tangpa, comes across a disciple who says, yes, I can tell you about where that came from. And he says, I want to meet the author. Well, by then, Geshe Langri Tangpa had passed. So the disciple had to break the news to him. I'm sorry, you've missed him. He's passed away. But I can give you information about it. So moved Geshe Chikawa, he then came out with the 7 verses of mind transformation. And then we also have things also working from there of Lama Atisha's mind slogans, lojong slogans. 59 of them, Lama Atisha's lojong slogans, okay? a very famous one that relates to this course, because we're talking about bodhicitta, which I'm going to talk about more, is place all the blame on one. So we talk about blaming in our cultures. Place all the blame on one. I just want to ask you. So when I'm giving the gallery view right now, okay, place all the blame on one. So what I wanted to mention is we come from a country that blames. So Vladimir Putin says, well, there's Nazis in Ukraine. It's Nazi regime, even though they have a Jewish leader. Okay, it's a Nazi regime, okay? Not exactly accurate, possibly, okay? But he blames. It's one way, he's a very unhappy person, probably, right? And then because of the fundamental confusion, he gets attachment going. He wants Ukraine, he wants that country, right? He wanted Crimea, he wanted, you know, the next country, what's it gonna be next, okay? Then he also has anger going. Doesn't like that Ukraine, when they had elections, they elected a democracy. He didn't want that. He had somebody in power that he thought was gonna get elected. The people spoke, the people defeated it. You know, so now he's got anger going on. So you have the three poisons. Fundamental ignorance, number one, everything rooted in that, meaning confusion, you know, an underestimation of reality, you get anger and hatred, and an overestimation of reality, and you get attachment and desire. Three poisons, okay. So you have somebody that then blames, well, it's Ukraine's fault. They're doing it to me. They're the cause of my unhappiness, okay? So we love blaming externally. Let me just ask you a question right now. Some of you know the answer to this, okay? What makes you a Buddhist? Some of you have been at this for years. We study Buddhism. We have all these ideas about Buddhism. What makes you a Buddhist? Just curious, anybody, feel free to unmute or raise your hand. What distinguishes you as a Buddhist, would you say? Okay, let's not all jump in there at once. Anybody? I'm trying to determine, sorry, Kirsten's photo. What is that a photo of, if I may ask? Okay, we'll figure that out later. What makes you a Buddhist? Anybody?
Trying to follow the teachings of the Buddha.
Trying to find the teachings of the Buddha, sure. What's specific about those teachings of the Buddha? Anybody? And anything else you feel that makes you a Buddha, makes you a Buddhist?
Refuge.
Refuge. Yeah, people often say, well, I've taken refuge. I find Buddha Dharma Sangha as my refuge. That's the source I go to when I'm suffering, when I have a problem. That's who I go to. What else? Anything else? What do you remember, Maureen? I'm picking on.
I would say that, entering the path in order to first strive to become enlightened so that then you can help to alleviate all the suffering in the world.
Sure, yeah, great. I mean, they're all great things, what you said, and they're all related to this one fundamental thing that really makes you a Buddhist. You're an inner being. Okay, Buddhists are inner beings. Now, all these other things are true. Refuge, walking on a path, like Maureen said, so you can benefit others reaching this place. And Peggy said, so that I can follow the Buddhist teachings. And the Buddha taught it's not about external blame. Take care of your mind, get your mind together. Okay, that's what makes you a Buddhist. And granted, compassion and all these other things, of course. Okay, but think about an inner being. Think about, and so little homework exercise this week is I want you to try to check, and you need to write this down. And if it's okay with Gina, what I tend to do with some classes is around Friday, today's Tuesday, or no, today's Wednesday. So Friday, I'm going to send Gina, I'll probably send it to her after class. I'll send Gina a little homework assignment to remind you about the homework. Okay, unless you want to jot it down here. But how are you being an inner being this week? When did you think it was somebody else's fault? When were you looking external and saying, that's so irritating, that person's so irritating? So Lama Zopa Rinpoche is teaching more and more, and he teaches in different ways over different kind of decades and things, is everything comes from the mind, as we know. In Buddhism, everything comes from the mind. So I need to look at my mind. I need to go in and look at my mind. What is going on? There are things that are irritating. There's no question, right? Get curious, please. Get curious rather than judgmental. Okay. And rather than laying a trip on yourself, and rather than laying a trip on someone else, external, I like to get curious when my delusions arise. What is it telling me? There's a message from the universe there coming from my mind. Okay. So it helps me get to know my mind. And as I get to know my mind through my meditation practice as well, through my study, applying the studies in meditation, applying my meditation in everyday life, it all goes together. Readings, okay, maybe some retreats, mini retreats you get on, longer retreats. There's all these components that you put together for your spiritual career, basically. So then I want to look at and get curious. I wonder why I'm really, really irritated with these people right now. It happens. And partly you can kind of say, like, I know myself enough, and I'll say, well, you know, I'm really tired. Or because I keep asking for this help for this specific thing, and nobody seems to responding with the things, with the answers that I'm needing for this specifically. I'm not hearing from, you know, there's different reasons. Or I notice that I get really fearful when I'm around these people. Or I get really agitated when I'm around these people. Or when I'm with these people, I feel really spacious and happy and really interested in helping others. So you start learning these things, these components about yourself and your mind, which is what our practice is about. And then I start making realistic adjustments. Realistic adjustments. That's what mind training is about. It has to be realistic for you. Newer people say, oh, I should get in spiritual practice. They say, meditate. I guess I'll meditate an hour a day, but you don't have much context in meditation. So you're just sitting there spacing out. That doesn't work. Okay. What about 10 minutes a day? Beginning of the day and the end of the day. You set a motivation in the beginning. You do a dedication in the end, but have 5 minutes to calm yourself and be still. We're never still. We're rarely ever still. So I don't have time to look at my mind, but the problems still come. And I have less coping mechanisms, less better. So if you're an inner being and a problem comes, you kind of go, curiosity, I wonder what's going on. You know, we have little problems, then we have big problems. You know, and you might say, well, this sucks. So I wonder if there's anything I can do about it. I can't fix people outside of me. But Buddhism says you can fix your mind. Fantastic. Okay, so the 8 verses, there's also some other beautiful verses of another lojong text I really like that I sometimes use about transforming the path, transforming problems. Okay, let's look a little bit more at this course and what we're talking about. So I also wanted to mention, when I mentioned the readings, there is what I'd like you to do this week as well is reading number 1. It's really about 12 pages. It's not that long. 8 verses of thought transformation by His Holiness, the Dalai Lama. If you can read that, you may want to read the second one, Mahayana Thought Transformation, Lama Zopa Rinpoche. So read the first couple of readings and would be really, really helpful. And then I'll mention a little later the meditation to do. In addition, there's additional readings. There's also Wish Fulfilling Golden Sun. There's some pages of that hopefully Gina can send out the actual pages from the text that she's going to send you. Liberation in the Palm of Your Hand. We have a couple different versions of that. There's a 3-volume version and there is a 1-volume from Wisdom Publications. So there's pages associated that you'll see in your readings with that. There's the book Transforming Problems into Happiness, I'd highly recommend, from Lama Zopa Rinpoche. And there's a book called Transforming the Mind. So there's a lot of readings. They're all related to each other. Some of them repeat some of the things they're saying, but they're really, really helpful. Okay, so I just wanted to mention that. These thought transformation teachings are part of the great scope of the Lam Rim. Great scope, which is a motivation built on the scope of the medium capable being, which is built on the scope of the lower capable being. Again, lower capable being motivation of the Lam Rim is I am terrified of what may come next. I'm going to die and it could be much worse. So the teachings involved in that scope are teachings on the preciousness of being a human, situations passing away quickly, death and impermanence. I could fall into lower realms. What will protect me is refuge, which is the sacred door through which the teachings are entered. And then I want to hear about karma to learn how to conduct myself. and avoid 10 non-virtues and practice the 10 virtues or ethical conduct. That's all the topics that are involved in that particular scope and motivation, all layered on a basis of guru devotion. That's kind of a preliminary to the Lam Rim. Then, based on that motivation, a medium capable being realizes, well, even the suffering in this life is not good enough. So I really like to get out of my suffering. I'm tired of suffering. So a lot of the different sufferings are taught here, what we call the 3, the 6, and the 8, different types of suffering, but also looking at nirvana, liberation, and end of the suffering. Okay? So dealing with the first noble truth, there's suffering. Dealing with the second noble truth, the cause of the suffering, delusion and karma. And the third noble truth, there is an end to the suffering. There's an end to the suffering. Okay? And then moving into build on those 2 motivations comes the higher capable being, which these teachings fit in. It's not only enough to get myself out of the suffering, but all these other beings are suffering. So if I can fully wake up and become a fully enlightened being, a Buddha, okay, and if I can learn the right view, emptiness, to rip out the root of my suffering, okay, dismantle the misknowing, okay, and then if I can develop the good heart, bodhicitta, bodhi, enlightenment, chitta, mind. The mind of enlightenment is what? Cherishing others more than yourself, getting enlightened to benefit all living beings, involving great compassion, empathy, and it also involves self-compassion. This is not a path of neglecting yourself, beating up yourself. So that's not what cherishing others is about, is completely neglecting myself. You have to come from a healthy basis yourself. So from that, I then, having the 2 wings of the bird, as they say, the right view, okay, 1 wing, the right heart, the good heart, your skillful means, your method and wisdom flies you to enlightenment, okay? But the real purpose, so I can benefit all living beings, so I can show others the path that they can free themselves of suffering permanently and get enlightened and benefit all living beings. So these are all the great scope teachings like that. And so what really helps on this path, what's needed is a very clear understanding of samsara, how we're caught in cyclic existence, okay? How we're compelled to take rebirth again and again and again, okay? And how we have this unique and precious opportunity right now in this life to steer ourselves away from the suffering, okay? How we have this unique and precious opportunity like that, this path. So the very first thing to remember in thought transformation, okay, is we need to have some level of renunciation of samsara, okay? And what prevents renunciation is the 8 worldly concerns. I think most of us are familiar with. So I just want to ask again, sorry, I teach a little in an engaged level, is what's renunciation to you? What does renunciation mean? You've heard the word often. I'm just curious. Any thoughts?
It's maybe not being attached, to being able to allow things to come and go without the attachment to,
Yeah, let things come and go without the attachment, not feeling attached. Yep, definitely like that. What else is, when you say renunciation, what does that mean to you? Is it giving away all your belongings? We think of giving something up, right? It does involve giving something up. Maureen's talking about, I'm giving up attachment. I want to be as attached. What are you giving up, really? What are you giving up? Anybody?
The ego self.
Sorry,
Ego, yeah. And who else? Giving up the ego and giving up what? Who else was just speaking?
Hi, this is Julia. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to overlap.
No,
I think of it as also giving up the idea that something external to yourself is going to be a source of happiness, or that conditions outside of your own mind will bring you joy or suffering.
Sure. Yeah, that's certainly related. Absolutely. Okay, so I'm going to give you the Lama Yeshe, the quick down and dirty, okay? Renunciation, because one way they say traditionally, technically, you know, I've heard Lama Zopa Rinpoche say this, when you strive day and night to get out of samsara, Sanskrit word to cycle, to turn through birth, old age, sickness, and death. Samsara, Sanskrit word, korwa in Tibetan. When people talk about around a stupa, they do korwa, circumambulation. They turn, okay? But we're turning through this mess, samsara. It's broken. You can't fix it. As long as you're a sentient being in samsara, and that means one who hasn't had a direct perception of emptiness, an ordinary being, okay? You're going to suffer from samsara. You're going to experience it in a suffering way. But know that you can get out of samsara. Okay, so technically it is this, you're striving day and night to get out of samsara. So that's a hard one because we go, well, I'm not striving day and night. I'm striving at times, maybe not all the time. This was Lama Yeshe's version. Renunciation, simple, it's great. You give up. This is what you're giving up. Whatever disturbs your mind. Think about it. Whatever disturbs your mind. Okay? Here comes a bubble of irritation. Wouldn't you like to let go of that? Here comes attachment. Here comes a wave of attachment. Here comes chronic depression. Don't you want to give that up? Anxiety, fear, pride, jealousy, confusion. You get the idea. Delusion is what disturbs your mind. Okay. And delusion that I'm not willing to give up. Think about this. I'm not willing to give up. Right. So as a result, it creates another pattern in my mind, another imprint in my mind that I'm going to go on in that subtle consciousness onto the next rebirth, causing the next rebirth and the next rebirth and the next rebirth. But rebirths in suffering, not rebirths of blissful peace and wonder. Rebirths in suffering in samsara. Aren't you tired of that? So here's what happens. We have little pockets of renunciation that are really exciting for you. Little exciting moments. And I'm kind of going to joke with Carol, she's back on here, is just in the Discovering Buddhism video we just watched, there were a couple of people we saw who are no longer monastics in there, right? That I'm sure she recognized, okay? One of them, my old boyfriend, okay, my last boyfriend before I got ordained. So we had interesting time together. We got ordained together, you know, we in the same ordination ceremony together. And what happens is he was a little geared to getting ordained before I was. And he became Lama Zopa Rinpoche's second attendant. And it just seemed like it was going to happen for him first. And he started wanting it and it was happening. And it didn't seem to be happening for me as quickly. But we were at a big retreat with Choden Rinpoche at Vajrapani many years ago. And suddenly my boyfriend's kind of like, I want to get ordained. I've got robes. Like he had robes. I was like, this is happening. You know, and there were these public ordinations that Rinpoche was doing. And people could watch, but I couldn't watch that one because I had a class I had to teach in town in Boulder Creek. So I couldn't go to the ordination. And so what happened is it all seemed like it was happening and he was going to take ordination and whatever. And so I'm driving out on the road, and some of you know Vajrapani in California. It's 20 minutes on a single horrible mountain road, dirt gravel road to get to the main, 20 minutes on this road to get to the main road. And I'm driving on the road and my mind's like, you know, there goes my boyfriend and what am I going to do? Another relationship, and I'll come back and he's going to be in robes and there's going to be there were 80 people at the center doing retreat and they're all going to be looking at me and how do I feel and am I okay? And I just couldn't deal with the whole drama. But I'm on the road thinking of all these things driving. And I'm really thinking, what am I going to do? Am I going to start another relationship? You know, I had a lot of relationships. There was nothing wrong. There's nothing wrong with relationship. But at the age that I was at that time, I was like really thinking, all the time you spend getting into relationship and learning about the other person and your history and all the things you do with them. And I, was so deeply enmeshed in this center and the work I was doing at the center. And I thought, and I remember by the time I got to the road, the main road, I was like, I don't think I can do this again. I'm tired. I was tired of it. So it was a really good experience of I felt like I don't think I can do it. I don't want to do it again. I'm giving it up. Giving it up, right? So, and it was very strong in me. I remember thinking, God, I always wanted to have a relationship. So I was like, that's different. Like, am I really willing to give it up? I don't know if I was ready to get ordained, but I couldn't imagine starting with somebody else. And he was a great boyfriend. So who was I going to find that had the same guru? And right. So anyway, I taught my class and I come back and he's not ordained. Right. I'm like, now what? It's just so interesting. The couple karma we had until we managed in the third public ordination Chen Rinpoche gave every 2 weeks, there was another ordination, 3 people, 9 people got ordained in a 6-week period during that retreat, during the 8-week retreat. So we were in the third batch, the third 3, and just squeezed in there, made it in, right? So it's very interesting look at this week. If you can this week, you're an inner being, number 1, okay? And then I want you to look at little pockets of renunciation if you can this week. Meaning, like, is there something in your life where you kind of go, I'm tired of that suffering like that. I don't want to do that. I don't want to do that thing with my husband anymore, of that kind of back and forth. You might say, like, can we have our relationship in a different way? I don't want to keep, I don't know, people with your devices. People waste a lot of time playing games and looking at this and that and streaming videos. And then you say you don't have time for Dharma practice. So what if you gave up 15 minutes of that time and shifted that over into your Dharma practice or into having little quiet meditation time? And don't feel like you always need to do something in meditation. Sometimes you just need to sit and just breathe and let go and be. Sometimes it's not, my meditations often start there, 5 minutes of that, and then suddenly I'm ready to meditate. I'm relaxed now. Just let it all go. So do you know what I mean? Can you find these little pockets of renunciation where I don't think this thing is as beneficial? This disturbs my mind. What would it take for you to give it up? What can you give up? Okay. Thanks, Maureen. I know you need to help your mom. So we'll talk soon. So what can you give up like that? And again, realistically, you're not cutting people out of your lives. You're not saying, I can't stand Uncle Charlie. I never want to see him again. It's not realistic, okay? But there are some people that I'm really close with that I love, that are part of my family. Sometimes too much time with them, I don't find it that beneficial. When they're talking about, all the TV shows they recently watched and giving me every plot twist on every show. And so you can limit the time. Sometimes I'll just spend a little bit less time or choose when I'm, okay, I think I'm gonna go home now. I don't feel negatively about them at all. It's just how you choose to spend your time. And as you get older, you have less time left in this life. Don't you want to make the most use of the time? So it's something to think about.
Amy, I had a yoga teacher who used to say, don't just do something, sit there.
Yes, yeah, there you go. Because we're human, we're human doings. We're always doing. What about just being? Can we just be sometimes? It's really helpful. Okay, let me go back to my notes here. So think about that this week and avoiding, we're familiar with the 8 worldly concerns, 8 worldly dharmas it's called. You know these pairs. We avoid pain and we glom on to, we're attached to pleasure. We avoid gain and loss. We want to avoid that. Praise and blame, fame and dishonor. So the literal way they're defined in Buddhism is being happy when you're experiencing pleasure, being unhappy when you're experiencing displeasure or pain, being happy when I get something, being unhappy when I don't get something or I lose something or something's taken from me, being happy when I hear flattering sounds about me, praise, being unhappy when I hear unflattering sounds about me, blame. being happy when I have a good reputation, and being unhappy when I have a bad reputation. These are the 8 worldly dharmas, or 8 worldly concerns. Okay, that's what prevents us from having proper renunciation, is we love pleasure. We're so attached to it. We'll drive everything into that, into getting what we want, okay, into people saying nice things and thinking we're great, like that. And we will do everything we can to run from the opposite of that. So the 8 worldly concerns, they're helped by ignorance. They're helped by self-cherishing. Okay, let's look at cherishing, self-cherishing. What are we talking about with that? We're trying to counter, okay, but with wisdom and cherishing others. So this course is all about, when I mentioned bodhicitta, the enlightened attitude. So, and learning how to counter the 8 worldly dharmas is really important. It's an important part of thought transformation, this key to developing renunciation. So if you understand how the 8 worldly dharmas work with self-grasping and self-cherishing, and how they've kept us trapped in samsara, okay, you start developing your wisdom, growing your compassion to move into more that room of renunciation. Okay. So I want to talk about the differences of self-grasping and self-cherishing. So self-grasping is an ignorant way that we accept or hold the the sense of myself to exist. Self-grasping is this confused way based on the misknowing I talked about, misunderstanding reality, not having a direct perception of emptiness. Due to that, I grasp onto the self as being inherently existent. These are synonyms: concretely existent, of it having intrinsic value, independent nature, existing from its own side, with its own nature, independent, permanent for all time. That's how we have a sense of ourselves. That's self-grasping. Okay, that's a delusion. It's a faulty mind. It's a mistaken consciousness. Okay, so first the self appears due to the mistaken consciousness, okay, to exist in a more gross way than it actually exists. Okay, and then we hold that wrong view to be true. That's self-grasping. So due to my ignorance, the self arises as all those things: permanent, independent, intrinsic, like that. And then I attach to it, holding that wrong view to be true. Okay. The self does exist. It exists on a conventional level. I'm not throwing it out and saying it doesn't exist. You can't step in front of a bus because the bus will kill you, a moving bus. Okay. The self does exist, but not the way it appears to self-grasping ignorance. Self-grasping ignorance is the root of samsara. It's the root of our suffering. And then self-cherishing is based on self-grasping. Okay? Self-cherishing is an overestimation of the importance of my needs over somebody else's, of one's needs over someone else's. The need that you want to experience happiness, that you want to avoid suffering. There's 2 of those 8 worldly dharmas. Okay? It's a narrow, self-absorbed, I'll say, self-centered view, okay, but not actually a delusion like self-grasping. Okay, interesting. Self-grasping, okay, however, self-cherishing on the basis of self-grasping strengthens all of our delusions. That's how they work together in a very negative way. Okay, so once again, self-cherishing, which is not an actual delusion, on the basis of self-grasping, which is a delusion, this ignorant way that we hold the self and believing in that to be true, okay, then having the self-cherishing coming from that strengthens all of our other delusions. So what do we do? Okay, part of this is, and this was a radical approach, is we start moving along this 5-fold path to developing bodhicitta, Okay. And what's this 5-fold path? So again, when we, there's 2 methods, as most of you know, to develop bodhicitta. The more prevalently taught one is called the 7-point cause and effect method to develop bodhicitta that came originally, they both came from the Buddha, but passed down through various teachers. 7-point cause and effect passed through Master Nagarjuna to eventually Lama Zopa, and he was in Indonesia, and he passed this method on to us in more modern days. Okay, even though he was back there, the 8 more ancient days, he does have a modern version like that. 7-point cause and effect, where you're remembering all beings to be your mother, reflecting on their kindness, wishing to repay their kindness, great compassion, love, great compassion, universal responsibility, or that altruistic intention that results in bodhicitta. The second method was secret. And as they mentioned in the video, it was secret because it was extremely radical, okay? A 5-fold path. Now I wanna say that both of these paths rest on a basis of equanimity. I am gonna talk about that in future sessions. Equanimity, okay? An equal regard, equal respect for all beings. So what happens is the first step on this 5-fold path is based on equanimity, equal regard. But why it was so radical is part of this is an exchange of self with others, is in a sense taking on their suffering with Tonglen and giving them your happiness. That's why it was radical. Who would want to take on somebody's suffering? Who would want to give away your pleasure? Like our culture, certainly not, especially in the United States, not at all. But look at our planet. Everybody's going for pleasure. Everybody's doing whatever they can do for it. We see in the very extreme cases, like with war, the war in Ukraine. Okay? And who would want to give up their pleasure and give it to others? You know, we want as much for ourselves and any way to avoid suffering, whatever we can do. Okay? So just thinking about kind of showing up for your mind like this, it's very, very radical. And that's why it was a secret teaching. Lojong teachings aren't something I discuss with people that aren't into the Dharma. This is why it comes as number 11 of 14 modules. Okay, it already takes a somewhat trained mind, somewhat subdued mind to understand that I can accept problems. In fact, I can start welcoming them because they transform my mind more significantly if I can use them and see them as an opportunity. So based on this, based on equanimity, you then come to 2 different methods of looking at the negative effects, negative ramifications of cherishing myself and looking at the benefits of cherishing others. The faults of self-cherishing, I think, are pretty clear. They list them in the Lam Rim in a traditional way. The faults of self-cherishing, you know, you create an obstacle to your path, you don't have any realizations, you create a lot of negative karma, you don't have, you know, on and on like that. Okay. But you can kind of see, and I'd love you to, as you start looking at renunciation this week, as you look at being an inner being, okay, look at your self-cherishing if you see it. If you can, this is something I'm going to ask you all these 6 weeks. Yourself, like when you're not happy this week, look at these 6 weeks. When you're not happy, a little cloud has come across your horizon. Suddenly, please have a look at your mind. What is going on? And I mean, really try to be as mindful as possible. Make notes for yourself. Put a reminder on your phone. Thich Nhat Hanh was quite famous in his communities for having a mindfulness bell. We tried to do that at some of our centers. It's really a mindfulness bell. I think the bell rang every hour, and wherever you were doing, you had to stop and look at your mind. What am I doing right now? So what happens is when a little cloud comes across your horizon, and it can be some small problem, some small unhappiness, sometimes there's bigger unhappinesses. What's your mind doing? I like to actually look at, so what's my mind telling me now? What is happening? What am I doing? Who's around me? Because, you know, you really want to get familiar with that. Really want to get familiar, because look, the self-cherishing is there all the time. Self-cherishing's caused all of your problems. Self-cherishing is really the one to blame for everything that goes wrong, okay? So when I mentioned Master Atisha's lojong slogans, the famous one of the most famous ones is place all the blame on one. I'd love you to think about that in this course. Place all the blame on one. We blame everybody else. I'm unhappy, it's your fault. You were supposed to make me happy. People get into relationships that way. You know, I'm gonna, you know, it's almost like a drowning person, the way they lunge on people when they're drowning. They lunge on the rescuer, right? You're gonna fill me, you're gonna fill my holes, you're gonna make me happy. So much pressure to put on a relationship. No one can make you happy but yourself. People can support some happiness, you can have fun with people, but if you're not happy in yourself, it's not gonna work that way. So the only one to blame is the self-cherishing. You're not blaming yourself. You're not being a masochist. You're not being mean to yourself. You're looking at the self-cherishing. When we do eventually Tonglen meditation, which is part of this class, it's one of your meditations, okay? You place that knot of your self-cherishing at your core, at your heart center, okay? That's what we're working to reduce through the visualization. I'll explain that in the future, okay? That's the only thing. So let's think about that through this course. When you are having a problem, when you're upset, place all the blame on one. It's just your self-cherishing. So self-cherishing is to blame for a lack of world peace, for war, environmental problems, bad relationships, poverty, people criticizing you, people being mean and rude to you, for your physical problems, for your mental problems. This is what Buddhism says. Everything comes from the mind. Every single thing that you think of as mental or physical suffering, okay, comes from self-cherishing. Okay. They even say it is a nasty beast. Okay. So, however, mostly we think the cause of the problem is external. It's somebody else is doing it to us. This is the beginning of mind transformation. Owning my self-cherishing. Okay. Again, you're not a bad person. Not a bad person. But owning that self-cherishing, let's start to have a look at it. Questions? Any questions? Okay, everybody doing okay? Okay, I'm going to stop there this evening. So again, please, if you can, read those first two readings. One or two of those readings would be great. And I'll get to the meditations next week. But you can have a look at the meditations. Tonglen is one of them. It's great. Okay. And again, we talked about, I want you to look at being an inner being. What can I take responsibility for? Is it coming from my own mind or is it coming externally? have a look at that. Look at renunciation. What do you think that means? What are you willing to give up that disturbs your mind, that you may be able to drive into your Dharma practice? Can you place all the blame on one? Look at the self-cherishing. Everybody okay? Thank you. So we're going to dedicate the merit. And I look forward, I want to thank all of you for joining and also look forward to seeing you next week as we delve more into transforming problems. So I'd like to invest, when we dedicate, so we had our bookend, the beginning of the day's motivation, beginning of the class, at the end we dedicate, we've got these bookends around our practice. The motivation helps us get the mind directed in the right way. The dedication takes whatever merit or positive energy we've created and invests it in the practice, invests it in our waking up quickly so we can benefit all living beings. It's one of the best dedications to make like that. So rather than having that little drop of liquid in your palm that dries up quickly, you're taking that drop and putting it in the ocean. Then it becomes part of that vast pool of the water. So when we dedicate, it's investing that, especially in that subtle consciousness, sealing in the merit before it gets destroyed by severe delusion like anger and things like that. So I'd like to dedicate also to our sisters and brothers in Ukraine. May that situation, somehow our prayers maybe are being answered where it's not working so well for the Russians. I mean, I think they thought it would be over in 3 days, the war, and they would conquer, but hasn't happened. So let's keep dedicating our prayers to peace immediately there and in all conflicts everywhere. And for all the beings who need additional healing, body and mind, may they receive it immediately, completely. For the great flourishing of all of our centers, especially Chen Ling Center, and for all of our practices to get us quickly to enlightenment to benefit all. Ogewadi Nyoruda Lama Sangye Drugyone Drowa Chikyang Maluba Dei Sala Ubarjo Jangju Senjo Rinpoche Ma Ke Panam Ke Gyurchik Ke Wanyam Pa Me Pa Yom Gone Gondu Belwarjo. For the long life of His Holiness the Dalai Lama, let's read in English. The wish-granting, wish-fulfilling jewel, source of every single benefit and happiness in this world, to the incomparably kind Tenzin Gyatso, I beseech, may all your holy wishes be spontaneously fulfilled. For Lama Zopa Rinpoche, you who uphold the subduer's moral way, who serve as the bountiful bearer of all, sustaining, preserving, and spreading Manjunath's victorious doctrine, who masterfully accomplish magnificent prayers honoring the three jewels, Savior of myself and others, your disciples, please, please live long. Thank you so much, Gina. You are, spiritual program coordinator supreme. And thank you so much for joining. And I look forward to seeing you next week.
Thank you so much, Venerable Amy. And thanks everyone for being here. We'll see you all next week.